Hey folks, hope you all are doing well. I'm Karan Bandal from Cite, your weekly economic wrap from India and around the world. So let's get started with major accounting firms. Big Four enter India's smaller cities. The Big Four is the nickname for the four largest accounting firms in the United States as measured by revenue. These firms provide auditing services, tax, strategy and management consulting, valuation, and other relevant services to major publicly listed firms like, for example, Berkshire Hathaway, Ford Motor Company, Apple, ExxonMobil, Amazon, and so on. The vast majority of Fortune 500 companies have their financial statements audited by one of the Big Four. You can see they have a massive global presence and now are expanding beyond India's biggest cities like Mumbai, Delhi, and Bengaluru. Global demand for cheaper back office operations is growing. Big Four are responding by stepping up investments in India's smaller towns as they move up the economic value chain. These smaller cities are now able to compete with the vast low-cost talent pools, particularly in information technology, available in the big cities of India. A report by Ernst & Young in June said it expects multinationals to set up global capability centers for all types of industries in Tier 2 cities such as Jaipur, Vadodara, Kochi, and Chandigarh. The number of such centers could expand to 2,400 by 2030, adding 2.6 million jobs and over $100 billion to the economy. Rising wages, declining accounting graduates in developed countries, and visa restrictions mean qualified Indians cannot go to these developed countries as easily as before to work. These developments have helped India emerge as a powerhouse for global business services like taxation, data analytics, cybersecurity, and customer management. For India's services exports, software services growth has come down a bit, but business services like what the Big Four provide, their export growth has outperformed all expectations. Business services exports now make up 25% of total services exports. The Big Four are planning a massive expansion with their India workforce. India has set a service exports target of $400 billion for the ongoing fiscal year, about 25% more than the previous year, and it is expected India's total services exports could overtake goods exports in the next 5 years to $750 billion. Most of this growth is likely to be seen in India's smaller cities. Next, US-China tussle now visible in the numbers. China has been America's top trading partner for much of the 2010s and again at the start of the pandemic. That dynamic is changing. Meet America's new old best friend in the world economy, Mexico. Trade between US and Mexico in the first 4 months of this year has reached $263 billion, accounting for 15.4% of America's total trade. Canada comes second at 15.2% and China now pushed to number 3 spot at 12%. Even as the world moves on from the height of the pandemic, Mexico's ability to take the top spot away from China is not only admirable but also a clear sign of how the economic chaos of 2020 is set to continue to define the world economy for years to come. The seeds of this shift were sown before the pandemic, with former US President Donald Trump slapping tariffs on some Chinese goods and signing US-Canada-Mexico trade deal, a slight update of the nearly 3-decade-old NAFTA deal. These changes also suggest an accelerated shift towards nearshoring and the next stage of globalization that is focused on regional networks. Author Shannon O'Neill makes the case for regionalization over globalization and says that keeping production closer to home would help American workers. She states that average import from Mexico is 40% US made. That is, 40% of the parts that go into the end product are still produced in the US, which in turn supports employment in the United States. So, greater this percentage, the better. The average Canadian import, meanwhile, is 25% made in the US. Guess what is the case with a product coming in from China? Just 4% of it is US made. One thing is clear for now, trade between US and Mexico appears to be as strong as ever and should continue to grow. Finally, analysts cite India to make a bullish case on Apple. As things stand now in 2023, Apple is a massive company with around $387 billion in revenue, around $3 trillion in market cap, and its stock trading at around $190. The company has experienced exponential growth since the early 2010s. China was a major part of that growth story for the last 5 years. According to Morgan Stanley, India will play a pivotal role in Apple's growth for the next 5+ years. A combination of Apple's investment in manufacturing in India, Apple's efforts at building retail presence in India, India's improved electrification, and the country's economic boom is likely to result in India accounting for 15% of Apple's revenue growth and 20% of companies' installed base growth. This revenue growth, forecasted at $40 billion over the next 10 years, would be the equivalent to Apple ramping an entirely new product category. As a result, analysts have increased Apple's price target from $190 to $220 a share, with a bull case valuation of $270. In summary, from Big Four to Apple, companies are betting big on India. The Big Four's planned expansion in India's smaller cities will ultimately help push India's services exports towards the $750 billion mark. Firms like Apple and their manufacturing investments in India will help push India's goods exports to a similar number, while US-China trade tensions will likely benefit regional powers like Mexico. I hope you found this week's wrap interesting. I'll speak with you again next week. Until then, take care.